Hello, humans. All right, welcome to the Tech Humanist Show. Come on in, start gathering around. I am, of course, your host, Kate O'Neill. It's nice to see some numbers turning up, so it would be lovely to start associating those numbers with names, so feel free to go ahead and pop into your comments and type in a little greeting from wherever you are. Let me know you're online and that you're out there. Say hello and tell me where you're joining in from if you like. Also, today we're going to be talking a lot about the near future of retail and immersive experiences and other related topics. Also, maybe Portuguese pastries. So feel free to just start thinking of what your questions and comments are related to any of those things. And you could start asking those questions in the comments, or just hold on to them until the moment when you feel like it's the right moment to pop that question into the chat. So, but keep on saying hello and checking in, and I'll just go through some of our information for the people who are tuning in later in time, finding this later when it's an archive. Hello to those of you in the future from those of us in the past. We appreciate you. As you know, this is a multimedia, as you may know, this is a multimedia format program, so that means that as I'm speaking, it's being broadcast live, but it'll also live on as an archive on the multiple channels where it's streaming, so people can always find it later. So yeah, there are some of you who are going to be seeing that. And then also each episode gets turned into a podcast the following week. So as we have this conversation today on Thursday, this episode will be an audio podcast next Friday. So keep an eye out for that. And every week we explore different facets of how data and technology shape the human experience. I hope you'll subscribe or follow and just stay tuned for further conversations. There are a lot of great guests coming up, but let's not waste any more time. Let's just get to the guest we have today. One other note, though, is that as a live show, we will do our best to, vet comments and questions in real time. We want you to be part of the conversation. We want you interacting and having the conversation with us. But we might not get to all the questions or comments. So we very much appreciate you being here. I very much appreciate you being here and chatting with us and just generally participating in the show. So now to introduce our guest. Today we are chatting with my friend Neil Redding, who is founder and CEO of Redding Futures. It's a boutique consultancy that enables brands and businesses to engage powerfully with the near future. His rare multidisciplinary perspective draws on the craft of software engineering, the art of brand narrative and expression, and the practice of digital physical experience strategy. Prior to founding Redding Futures, Neil held leadership roles at Mediacom, Proximity BBDO, Gensler, ThoughtWorks, and Lab49. So, audience, please keep getting those questions ready for our outstanding guest. And with that, please welcome my friend Neil Redding. Neil, you are live on the Tech Humanist Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Kate, thank you so much for inviting me. It's fantastic to be here and great to see you again.
Yeah.
Across a little bit of distance.
Across a little bit of distance. Normally Neil and I get together and have coffee at maybe Le Pain Quotidien in the Columbus Circle.
True.
But we haven't been able to do that anyway this year. So
are they closed now? I think they are, right?
Yeah, so I think there was like a bankruptcy thing with the company that owns, or with Le Pain Quotidien, and then I think they actually liquidated the American holdings, and another company bought them.
Yeah.
So there's the scoop on LPQ.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll be able to go back to our coffee spot at some point. But right now, you are in Lisbon, right?
It's true. I'm in Lisbon, yeah, and I think when you mentioned Portuguese pastries, I think the first thing I Instagrammed when I got to Lisbon, a little less than 2 weeks ago, was pastel de nata, which is this Portuguese egg custard pastry. And I think you were like, first things first, right? I mean, this is you got to do,
you got to have your priorities. Absolutely.
What's on the top of your list when you get somewhere. I mean, yeah, and we've been here before once, and yeah, they are super delicious. So.
Yeah, so I think I mention this like every week that I'm vegan. So it was funny for me when I was in Lisbon because I had seen a lot of sort of promotion about those pastries going when I was heading to Lisbon, and I was like, it's going to be a bummer not to be able to find them. Maybe there will be a vegan equivalent. And I found like 4 different versions that were vegan.
Yeah.
I tried them all. They were so good.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, there actually it's amazing. There's a lot of vegan cuisine here
There
too.
really
Like
is.
last night we went to a Nepalese restaurant that had a whole separate vegan menu, and the guy who runs it was very excitedly promoting it to us, even though we weren't ordering from it. He's
Oh,
just
very
like,
cool.
let your vegan friends know. Yeah, so
Well, and you just did.
I did
So,
exactly.
and now you traveled to Lisbon, what you said, like 2 weeks ago? Is that
Little
right?
under 2 weeks. Yeah, and you're
And
wondering how, right?
yeah, yeah,
How
I
did
was
that
just gonna
happen?
say,
I mean,
you and I have already chatted since then, and I kind of got the lowdown. But is there any aspect of the story you would be willing to share with our viewers and listeners?
you know, um, I feel a little bit guilty, because like plenty of New York friends and just American friends are just like, I'm so jealous. Like, how did you do that? Well, I, it goes back to being born to an Irish citizen mom, and so I inherited that citizenship, which is EU citizenship, which allows myself and my close family, including my wife, to be exempt from the current travel ban from the U.S. So that was really the main reason. And I also have work here that I had a letter from a company that I'm working with here. So, but it turns out the work wasn't even required. So it's kind of the citizenship thing.
So it
So
was without incident, or was there anything that happened along the way?
it was pretty much without incident. It was shockingly without incident, actually. Like came through. I mean, the Delta folks at JFK made sure that I was an EU citizen and that Kylan, who was traveling with me, was my wife. And we had to show a marriage certificate, et cetera. But then in France, in Paris, Charles de Gaulle, they literally didn't care at all. They didn't say anything. They just said, go ahead. And then we got to Lisbon and they didn't even talk to us. They didn't see a border police. So it was kind of weird. And today, given like just today, there are new restrictions, right? I
Right.
mean, in the news in Portugal as well
In
as
Lisbon or
France and
Portugal?
Italy.
Okay.
And yeah, so I mean, not heavy restrictions, but just limiting indoor capacity,
Hmm.
limiting the number of people that can gather outside of certain kinds of gatherings and so on. But yeah, hopefully Portugal is still going to be chill about all of this. I mean, they've been doing really well relative to the rest of Europe. I think a lot of it is people are outside and the weather's still warm, so
Yeah.
it makes a big difference in terms of safety. But yeah, now masks are required everywhere. So anyway, my point is just that we got in almost 2 weeks ago. If we came now or next week, maybe we wouldn't. I don't know.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I had seen
so
the curfew in Paris, but I hadn't seen any announcement about what was happening in Portugal. So, yeah,
you
hopefully
don't
it's
usually on these roundups
right.
because Portugal is like too small to be mentioned on these lists, which is kind of a bonus, when you're trying to travel. It's like they're too small to be too concerned about.
Well, I hope it stays a good experience for you. So,
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
well, let's get into your work. You actually mentioned that you're there to do some work. So, is it seems like what's interesting to me is you describe yourself or your work is as a near futurist. So, why do you call yourself that, first of all?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, a few things. One is that uh, it's a term that's not used. And I think, near future, whenever I've just used the term, I started using it most of a year ago to talk about, I created this publication, Near Future of Retail, with a good friend of mine, Tony Parisi, who runs AR/VR brand strategy at Unity. And so we are looking at how technology is advancing in retail in that publication. Um, but in that context, I started to realize that near future, as distinct from, the sort of indefinite future or futurism, which I think is also tied or uh, about projecting the indefinite future. Near futurism or the near future is distinct, in the way I think about it, in the sense that it's, a little bit arbitrarily, we say the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, now during COVID, it feels like that's a
Yeah,
really far
it
horizon,
is.
right?
Yeah.
But right, like no one can think. I mean, when COVID first hit, I think people were just like, I can't even think about the next 3 to 5 hours or
Hmm.
days, But
Hmm.
but it feels, from a technology perspective. I mean, you and I think understand this that we can see based on what's emerging now what can emerge, plausibly over the next 3 to 5 years, and so therefore, um, the near future is an actionable time frame. Which, as a technologist and someone who, as you described earlier, kind of grew up through software engineering, I care a lot about building things and making tangible impact. Creating things that have functional value and utility, and so. is kind of near futurism is really about bridging the sort of more distant, more visionary futurism with what can be actionable today, for brands and businesses.
Well, do you find yourself, you mentioned building things, do you find yourself with the opportunity to build very often these days? I think of you as mostly doing a lot of consulting. Is that true of the work that you're doing, or are you finding an opportunity to keep your hand in?
Really both. I mean, so yes, primarily at this point, although I did kind of grow up professionally doing software engineering and then custom software consulting, I've really gradually transitioned into more creative strategic leadership and
Yeah.
those kinds of roles and working more with senior executives at clients, and so at that level, there's more vision and strategy and kind of strategic framing of
Hmm.
the upcoming months and years, of a brand or business. But um, I do, inevitably continue to prototype to understand new APIs and new technologies. I don't code for production anymore, is the way I describe it. But in order to understand certain kinds of technology capabilities, it's important, I think, to continue to have my hands in it.
Yeah.
So I do play with things, on the nights and weekends, just to understand them. And I also I'm close friends with a lot of, amazing software engineers and developers. So I kind of uh, leverage them, shall we say, to
Yeah.
kind of stay on top of topics that I don't have time to kind of explore directly myself. So,
Yeah, that's relatable. That feels like, to me, that's been most of the way that I've kept abreast of what's going on with different changes in the market. And I didn't mean any slight against consultants, obviously,
no,
since I
no,
am one
no,
myself.
no.
But I just wondered, you also mentioned strategy during your answer, and that made me wonder, how do you conceive of the difference between futurism and or near futurism and strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think strategy can be applied. I mean, it's a very broad concept, right? So like I've worked with in a how would I say in creative agencies or ad agencies, strategy is thought of differently than it is at, say, Gensler, where I led digital experience design, and they have strategists there that are focused on the built environment, which I know you share a lot of interest in that. Um, Strategy, and then there's business strategy that C-suite, and boards of directors engage in, at the business level. But I think near futurism as a practice, which is really something I'm kind of evolving and figuring out, to be honest, is um, about strategy for a slightly longer timeline than just the current moment, right? So, for example, if you do strategy for an ad campaign, or you do, brand strategy for, a rebranding or positioning a brand or business for the for the current moment, right?
Hmm.
You're going to look at what's the current state of the market, what are customer and demographic kind of sentiments and trends, at the moment. It's very momentary, I think, generally, right? Whereas uh, the kind of strategy that I would call near futurism that we build into our near future framework as a strategic framework and road mapping tool is focused on that coming few years, so it really looks at the trajectories of change that as we currently understand them, both emerging technology, but also shifts in business model, shifts in sort of disruption in certain marketplaces, certain industries, like for clients that we work for, and then even cultural shifts and sometimes even geopolitical shifts. I mean, there's just so much change happening right now, and all
Hmm.
these things really need to be taken into account when you're doing near future work. That's our stance, and so whereas strategy can really just be this is the current state of the market that we're focused on. Near future strategy is just looking at a slightly longer, 3 to 5 year time horizon.
And you mentioned the near future framework, which I know is your concept, your framework that you've created. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, yeah. So essentially, what it is as I started to say, is a minimum viable strategic framework, if you will. Using that. I don't know if it's like MVSF or something. I haven't. I'm just thinking aloud here. Like, what would the acronym be? That's probably a bad acronym, but like, um, the idea is that, I mean, when you're mentioning strategy a second ago, I was thinking about how I've heard from a number of people recently, like strategy is scary to many clients right now because if you're interested, if you're an executive looking for help from a consultancy or from a service provider, generally you're dealing like your house is on fire or you're dealing with urgent, panic level kinds of situations right now, thanks to COVID, thanks to just all the shifts that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so strategy sounds like a nice to have, I think, in many ways, at the current moment. But the good news, I mean, from our perspective, is that the near future framework is meant to be just the minimum amount of kind of strategic framing, like a framing, which is a way of understanding, again, these trajectories of change that are emerging now and sort of where we see them going over the coming few years or however far we decide to project. The minimum amount of that allows for effective action. And by action here, I mean coming up with hypotheses where the hypothesis would look something like, if we did X or if we built X, we would expect business benefit Y or customer benefit Z or whatever those, how we articulate that. And these hypotheses are structured and articulated in ways that they can then be tested, right? Either via building a prototype and putting that in some limited market test, or sometimes even just via market research. So the point is that this near future framework creates a set of hypotheses and a way of relating to those hypotheses that is biased towards taking action, right? Rather than spending many months creating some beautiful 200-page vision deck, or a strategy for the future of a business, which, don't get me wrong, like there's plenty of value in that in terms of like getting senior leadership at a brand or business aligned and on the same page. But I've heard so many times from clients over the years that kind of result is just not actionable. It can't be translated easily or sometimes even at all into actual like practical business value. So really what we're trying to do with near future framework is fill that white space that we see in the market between that 7-figure 200-page vision deck, and just sort of tactical flailing, on the other end of the spectrum, right? We want there to be some minimal strategic framing and a shared understanding of why we're building what we're building and how we see that as fitting into what's emerging over the next few years. And then the last piece of it is, and we're still working this out actually, we want to have at least quarterly, maybe even monthly, given the level of volatility in so many dimensions right now, meeting and recalibration of each of the plans, that we create, each of these hypotheses that we work with for clients, so that we can continually test the results and sort of put ourselves with the client on the hook to revisit and then recalibrate how we're sort of in market, so to speak, right, with these prototypes and these tests, and as quickly as possible actually deployed sort of production value, sort of creating business value for our clients. Does that make sense? So, I mean, it's essentially that minimum framing that allows everybody to understand, like, here's what we're doing and here's why, and then we continually meet, quarterly or monthly to recalibrate.
All right. So MVSF it is, or until a better acronym
what do you
comes
think
along.
of this? Yeah, I mean, the minimum viable framework or something, MVF, I don't know.
We'll work on it. We'll workshop it.
We can do it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Hey, I know that a lot of your work, at least your recent work, has focused on retail and the near future of retail. So I'm wondering what it is about retail that intrigues you, and why has it become the center of a lot of your work?
Yeah, it's a great question. In some ways, I just sort of not fell into it, but just sort of like gradually moved in this direction. After I decided I didn't want to code all the time for production environments or just be full on a software engineer, I spent some time in advertising. I think, as I mentioned, doing creative tech and strategy work. And
yeah, you talked about 200-page strategy decks. You sort of tipped your hand there that you've worked in an agency environment.
Yeah, or like I'm also, referring to like amazing firms like IDEO or McKinsey or Accenture, that will do these huge, heavy visioning kind of engagements. But sure, I mean, certainly ad agencies can put together, long, many slide decks as well. But the point being, where was
I'm sorry, I was asking you about why you're intrigued with retail, and I think
retail.
let you get down the wrong road.
No, absolutely. No, so I mean, in the agency world, right, there's so many brands that have retail presence that are very consumer focused. And so a number of years there, and then spending time running digital experience design at Gensler, actually, where we did a lot of work specifically for retail clients that had physical spaces, I just sort of gradually became more and more interested in it. And then I wondered, at some point reflected, on the question you're asking now, which is why, like what is so interesting about retail? And I'm really clear, and I get more clear all the time, that when you look at everything that has to do with buying and selling of things, like things, goods, services, it's so closely tied with what we care about most, like what we value most, like value enough as humans to spend our hard-earned money on, right? Or to go out of our way to procure. And so it really reflects, I mean, the realm of retail reflects something really deeply human and profoundly human. And we spend more and more of our time, I think, in contexts that we are apparently willing to have commercialized, right? Like all of our social media interaction is becoming colonized by opportunities to buy and prompts to buy things that, Facebook or Twitter or, wherever else thinks we're going to like and want to buy, so there's this suffusion of commercial transaction or at least discovery of goods that can be bought and sold, into these moments of our daily lives, So all of that increasingly deep integration of commerce and buying and selling of things into our self-expression, into our communication is, I mean, there are definitely downsides to it, and I feel like it'd be nice to just have social media sometimes that isn't colonized by all of that commercial interactivity, but it also means that, and it works because what we care about and what we are willing to buy and are interested in buying are so intertwined, right? They're kind of the same thing at some deep level.
Yeah, it's like a proxy for what's meaningful to us.
Yeah. Yeah, it
On
is,
some
right?
level, right? Not everything, obviously. Like we have to buy
Certainly not
things that
everything.
that are necessary, uh, but the things that we spend, especially our discretionary income on, it seems like that you could
Yes.
certainly think of as proxies for meaning. You've written about this, and you have a great piece on the near future of retail on Medium, right? Is where that platform is hosted.
Right.
And
Yes.
there's an excerpt of one of your pieces. I think this is your TLDR on the near
Hmm.
future of retail, where you wrote, "What we used to call shopping is diversifying and becoming suffused into who we are and how we live, less something external, intentional, and task-oriented, more essential and omnipresent in our moment-to-moment lives. This is partly due to the growth of materialism in the second half of the 20th century through today, and yet it's much deeper and broader than this." So a sort of similar sentiment to what you just expressed, but I wonder, could you
Right.
unpack that a little bit more for us? Because I think you were talking about some other forces in that piece as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was kind of as the TLDR, it was kind of I don't know, not quite a manifesto, but like sort of the framing of sort of why Tony and I wanted to create this publication in the first place is that we saw this at the fundamental level, all of the elements that make up retail broadly, like how we discover products, goods, and services, how they get made, how they get presented to us, what are the contexts in which we could discover them or purchase them or share them, whether or not we need to go physically to a store to try them out, or whether we can experience them in some way without visiting a store. Um, and then even the payment and fulfillment process, like all of these different elements that make up the sort of end-to-end, you might say, set of retail journeys are being almost kind of deconstructed and reconstructed into different business models by different brands and so on. So there's a lot happening there. The materialism piece in the second half of the 20th century, I just mean like I was saying earlier, I think there's an apparent willingness or comfort level, maybe especially in America, right, as you and I know,
Hmm.
with the commercialization of almost every context in our lives, right? In our lifetime, like we've seen um, every day, almost every hour of every day, stores are open, promotions are happening, we're being marketed to, we're being advertised to, we can expect to go shopping. You know what I mean? I mean,
Hmm.
and this is, certainly pre-COVID, but I think
Yeah.
even during COVID, I mean, it's just all been completely digital, right? And then again, Instagram is sort of my go-to example where almost all of us, right, have experienced this uncanny presentation to us of something that we can buy that's like so closely tied to something. I mean, it's like, how did you know that this is what I wanted? I do want this. And so people, myself and even more than me, people close to me, um, I've just said, wow, I just keep buying this stuff that gets presented to me on Instagram that I never heard of before, but it gets pushed to me. It's like, yeah, it's so easy, and it's so aligned with what I already want. Um,
And you
so
know
it's
what,
kind
what's
of all,
interesting to me about that is
yeah,
that so often people assume that, and I think there's this big discussion about whether the devices are listening and whether the audio that's happening from, the picking up on our conversations is being used in targeting in advertising, and that's, certainly a question that could be debated. But one of the arguments that people who are adamantly saying no, that data is not being used, one of the arguments they make is you're more predictable than you think. Like your data points of
yes,
your preferences and your behaviors form a much more predictable model than you can
yes,
possibly imagine. And
right,
that seems like it's true when you see just how many kinds of
yes.
similar products are being pushed to you that you never heard of before in advertising platforms like Instagram, as you say.
It's it's true. Yeah. No, I mean, just like what was it like for your home companion? I think Garrison Keeler always used to say, all the children are above average, right, in this town. It's like we all think we're above average. We all think that we're capricious and unpredictable. And how could they know what I wanted? Well, it's like it's as you're saying, it's actually we're way more predictable. We have way less aberrant behavior than we think, right? We
Yeah.
actually so it's actually not that hard
Yeah,
to figure
not to
out
say that it's
what you want.
impossible that that audio is being used, collected and targeted, but that's not necessary, I think, in
No,
this
I know.
in this framework.
Do you find it? I mean, do you feel like it probably is, right? Even though there's denial across the board from big tech, right?
I mean,
I
everybody
mean,
has their anecdote, right? Everybody has a story. You can start a conversation at a cocktail party with just asking that question, like, what's the story you
yes.
have about when you thought your phone was listening to you? And like
Hmm.
everybody has a story. So there,
Hmm.
it feels like if it's not true that, if that data is not being used, then we just have a very interesting psychological, sort of sociological statement being made there with the way we
Right.
all constantly feel
Yes.
that. But it's so interesting, and not to keep derailing this subject, but it's also interesting
Hmm.
to me that's the kind of surveillance that everybody gets, upset about, as opposed to the constant, facial recognition and other kinds of data surveillance that's happening all the time, everywhere, in every channel and every part of our lives. But it's the audio, it's like that's the betrayal. It's like our phone is listening to us and serving us ads or helping to serve us ads, and I won't have it.
No, it is interesting. I mean, I think Deloitte published a report a few years ago that basically clarified that overwhelmingly, um, for humans, at least, and again, this is probably mostly in the States, but like privacy and avoiding being surveilled is a high priority unless there's some perceivable benefit, right, that I'm
Mhm.
receiving. And the benefit doesn't have to be big at all. It can be really, really small. And then I'm like, sure, like you can watch what I'm doing and personalize my experience or
Huh?
like make me targeted offers, right? Like people are constantly and have been for decades, signing up for to receive offers, coupons, whatever, whatever, right? And so it's interesting, yeah, as you said. I mean, I think the maybe people are upset about the possibility of eavesdropping, right? Like digitally, because they don't feel like it's directly, oh, it's just not part of the deal consciously, right? Like
Right.
it's not directly being translated in a way that is overt, right? If they said, hey, we're going to listen to what you talk about and then offer you, targeted deals based on what you talk about, people might be like, okay, I don't know. Like
Yeah. Well, so
if
okay,
there's a
that's a
clear benefit, right?
That's a
Maybe it
really
would
good
work.
segue back into your work, though, because I think one of the points that, that excerpt that I read that you were talking about, that one of the points that it seems like you're making, and you make often, I think, on LinkedIn in a lot of your commentary, is that shopping is so much more ambient than it has ever been, and it will continue to
Yes.
become more ambient, right? So it is the sense that if people made that explicit agreement, like, hey, your phone's going to listen to you and it's going to make shopping recommendations to you. Is that okay? And I do think you're right that most people would be like, okay, I totally want that. I want I want to know, like, what are these arcane things that I'm going to get recommended that are going to be on the nose, right? But what are some of the other ways that you're observing where that ambient shopping and commerce experience is playing out?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so I think some of the most relatable examples have to do with, the majority of households in the US anyway are Amazon Prime subscribers, right? So almost all of us, I think it's fair to say, have this experience of spending less and less time to get more and more
Hmm.
thanks to Amazon Prime, right? I mean, we certainly in New York, certainly in the middle of the pandemic, I mean, there was a couple of weeks where we couldn't like get delivery slots for anything, from Whole Foods via Amazon, or like we couldn't order anything that wasn't essential, from Amazon. But after a few weeks, they kind of got that sorted out. I spend so much less time shopping across the board than I did before I was able to get all, certainly groceries from Amazon, and then, but also kind of almost everything else that I frankly like get from Amazon. It takes so little time. And of course, Amazon is pushing wherever it can for me to subscribe, and they make it very easy to unsubscribe. So what they're trying to do. And Scott Galloway coined a term for something that I've been talking about for a while. He's great at coining these terms. Zero-click ordering, right? He was referencing the fact that Amazon, I think, patented actually, but certainly introduced one-click ordering some many years ago, and that was a huge innovation at the time. And they've been pushing towards zero fulfillment, right? Or zero fulfillment time, basically, right? 2 day, 1 day, next day, 2 hours, whatever. The point being, they're trying to just remove shopping as an explicit activity from your life, right? And I'm just saying, reporting from my own life, I spend very little time actually shopping, and I get a lot more kind of, I don't know if I get more stuff, but like maybe I probably do. I get more stuff.
Yeah, I would
So
say I do. Subscribe and
with less
save is a
effort.
big feature in our
Yeah,
house.
yes, for sure. So, I mean, it's not perfect, right? Because
Hmm.
ideally your inventory would always be exactly at the level that you
Right.
want, and they haven't sorted that out yet exactly. But another example is, like I was mentioning earlier, Instagram, where I could see people, certainly in our household, we spend less time shopping for certain things because we get pushed these interstitial ads, while we're browsing stories or whatever we're doing, that actually are aligned with something that we already wanted. So it makes it super easy and streamlined to buy. So there's just it could even be a minute, 60, 90 seconds. Does that count as shopping? To me, it just seems like, it was like, oh, we think you need this. Yes, I do. Give it to me. I mean, it's so, right? I mean, so the point is that this feels a bit ambient. Like I didn't go on Instagram. We don't go on Instagram to buy stuff, at least not yet. Maybe some people do, but it's not the primary purpose of it. But it's suffused into that whole experience of sharing our lives, tuning into other people's lives, just sort of being in this community of experience sharing, right? That you might say is what Instagram is, right? As an
Yeah.
example. So yeah, and I think that these are, this is where we are in late 2020, right? And I think that both in terms of fulfillment, I mean, Amazon and Walmart have already been like very overtly pushing towards um, proactively fulfilling, like sending us things that we haven't ordered, we haven't even subscribed to, but just based on the data they have about what we want, they're willing to actually send us something that we'll be like, no, actually, I don't want that, send it back, And so it's kind of proactive fulfillment based on what we want. So that is even less time. I mean, it's almost negative time spent shopping, unless it becomes super annoying and they send you stuff you don't want. But um,
Yeah,
you know
unless
what I
it
mean? So I feel
tips it
like these are,
toward time spent
yes.
returning, right?
Exactly. So they've got to sort that out, and they've got to get the balance right, because you don't want just stuff piling up that you have to, take to your local UPS store or whatever. But
Yeah, especially
um,
since, all these exposés about how returned merchandise barely ever makes it back out to anyone. It just ends up in dumps.
right.
So we
Yes.
definitely can't have that as a
So sad.
society, for
It's so
sure.
sad. Yeah.
Yeah, and so thinking about COVID and commerce too. So obviously, a lot of what the push has been is toward, sort of contactless experiences with food delivery, but also with shopping. But there's a lot of integration, obviously, of fulfillment systems and just-in-time ordering and go to the store and pick up and things like that. Are you seeing fulfillment or are you seeing these kinds of trends happening that you feel like were already on their way and they're just that's the sort of classic story about digital transformation under COVID is like we'll get to it, oh we better do it, sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Or is it new
Yeah.
stuff that's happening in many senses?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think the short answer is yes, it's really an accelerant. And again, I mean, if you listen to Scott Galloway, he's constantly saying this, has been saying this for months with COVID. But it was, from my perspective, based on the work that I do and have been doing for years, it's kind of, I don't know, it sort of makes me happy. It's sort of, or it's good luck or some combination of these things, because the reality is that nothing qualitatively, or very little qualitatively, has really changed in terms of what businesses need to do in order to thrive in the context of COVID, and frankly, any context going forward where physical proximity or where physical distance is required or physical proximity is not safe, right? It's dangerous or it's not convenient. So
When you say very little has changed in what businesses need to do, you are specifically talking about retail, right? Or are you?
well, I think generally, I mean, sure, I think retail for sure.
I mean, restaurants are in a completely different situation, are they not?
I think, well, I think they are, but I think what's also true, I mean, they're certainly different in certain ways. I think what's also true, if you look at like what has allowed certain restaurants to stay alive, to stay in business, right, over the past 7 months of COVID, is using digital technology, right, to fulfill via delivery services, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether it's like Uber Eats is huge here in Lisbon, in New York, it's more seamless, right, or Grubhub. But I think like there are local businesses that I'm sure you know in your neighborhood, right, that are still alive, maybe just barely, right, because the cut's being taken by these delivery services. But like if there wasn't that digital service layer, of order taking and fulfillment and delivery, they wouldn't be able to stay in business, right? So, I mean, it's not like they couldn't do it necessarily without that, but the point is that push to leverage digital technology for logistics and fulfillment and moving physical things around, right? I mean, any business that has physical materials, physical supply chain, if it's not a services business, really, for years it's been critical, and it's no less critical, it's more critical now that they're using digital technology, right, and software and hardware and sensors throughout the supply chain, the same way as it always has been. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying is not different. I mean, it's really the same. I think what is different, of course, during COVID is this accelerant around, as you said, contactless. The danger of being of touching or being physically close to other people, or I don't know, breathing their air. Being in dangerous spaces where there's tight population of humans, and so. One of the topics of the way I've been talking about it recently, and I actually gave a little talk yesterday about, and I called the end of distance, sort of trying to be a little bit provocative, but I think one of the dimensions of what's happening here broadly, I mean, not in retail, sure, but outside retail as well, is that, and it's been building for years, COVID has just sort of made it more poignant. We want to, I mean, as humans, of course, we long to be physically present, with each other, with things we love, with places we love, and we've really been suffering at that kind of emotional level, and that kind of, and maybe less urgently at the level of just pleasure and kind of joy in that physical, tactile, sensory experience. But there is technology that's continuing to emerge, and I think there's a lot of companies and VCs and so on have been doubling down the last 6 or 7 months on technologies that reduce the impact of that physical distance, through allowing me to feel like I'm in another space. Mm-hmm. And examples include, there are a few startups, one of which I'm working closely with, that is simulating the showroom for a store. And this is an interesting hypothesis. Do people want to be in a photorealistic version of a showroom that's beautifully merchandised, that feels like the Beau Concept or some other kind of high-end furniture store. I mean, obviously this is a little bit urban elite kind of example, but for all of us, for most of us, right? I mean, there are stores that we enjoy being in. The idea is that you can be in that space, sort of project yourself into that space, almost like people project themselves via an avatar into Fortnite or some kind of gaming scenario, right? And have that experience of being in that space. And then kind of conversely, um, similar technology, but slightly different, allows us to bring objects digitally in 3D, photorealistically, as we know through augmented reality, kind of bring objects or a simulation of them into our physical space. You know what I mean? So that we can browse them, sort of walk around them, get a sense of their three dimensions, how they look, how they might feel. And we have this kind of visceral reaction to them. But both of these, as well as the sort of trending towards zero fulfillment, kind of collectively make up this trend that maybe deserves being called a distinct trend, like the end of distance. Like how distance is just becoming, since we can't rely on physical proximity anymore, like we need to have our lives go on, right? I think that's our collective stance. How can we be present with the things and people and spaces and places we love at a distance, even partially, or even even in some kind of simulated way?
Yeah,
So that was
and
a long answer to that
no,
question. I don't know
it's
if I
great. I just want to
addressed
let
it.
you go and go.
Mhm.
What I'm thinking about while you're describing that, of course, I think immersive experiences are terribly exciting. I think, AR is potentially one of the most exciting technologies that I've ever seen, and is unrealized in its potential yet. But what I think about now, like what the in this stage of COVID, and how it's playing out, for me and my surroundings, what I find is I really miss third places. Like my home has
Mhm.
become, my apartment has become my home and my workspace. So I have the first and second space sort of taken care of
Right,
in one, and
right,
it also has to be the third space, and I just don't have the room, to have
right,
like a
right.
sufficient third space here. And of course, I'm used to being able to go out and like sit in a coffee shop and kind of have that, even if it's not actually interacting with other people, the ambient experience of
Yeah,
interacting with other people.
yeah.
And I think the easy thing that, someone might say, well, just go on social media or something like that. But there is something, as you say, about that, in the example you're giving about bringing an object in 3D into an immersive, surround kind of experience. There is something tactile, something kinesthetic, something physical about, and sensory about the way we interact with things that are around us, even if potentially even if it's virtual. And so I wonder what you think about that. Like, can we actually, recreate somehow an immersive virtual third space that isn't Second Life, or it isn't, something that's cheesy, that
Right,
really will give us that fulfilling sense in true end of distance form, that we can actually,
right.
find that fulfillment of the third place.
Yeah. I don't think that there's anything like in the immediate, or even we'll just use the term near future, right? The
Hmm.
next three to
Sure.
5 years, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in this space. I think the next 3 to 5 years, we will see augmented reality glasses, potentially even early augmented reality contact lenses.
Hmm.
There's a company, Mojo Vision, that's doing this. This is all about, layering digital content, including three-dimensional digital objects, right into your physical environment, and then eventually sort of snapping this content to the physical environment in a way that is believably realistic, right? And so we're still, although usably, AR is usable for many cases now, but it's still early days, as you said. So, but in terms of really getting to the point where we feel like, wow, like I can relax, I can feel satisfied, I can feel this sense of like, whatever it, exhale, let's
Yeah.
let's I'm being with my friends, or I'm having this experience that I don't know, I lived in Amsterdam a while ago, and I love that city, and they have this word the Dutch do, gezellig, which this word, it's like
No.
gezellig, it has a guttural at the beginning and the end. Um, and they must love the guttural sound, because what it means is, this word is, people say it's not really translatable into English, but it's like the kind of coziness you feel with your good friends in a candlelit like wood table space when you're like drinking old gin or like whatever you love, and it's sort of like coziness that you have in a beautifully appointed environment, well lit with your friends, right? It's that kind of special moment. So, I mean, that's what I'm thinking when you talk about the third place. I mean, that's maybe a kind of ultimate fulfillment of it. It doesn't have to be that great, perhaps, to have it be like a satisfactory third space. But I don't see digital technology really being that. With the huge caveat that, look, I don't know about you, but I'm not a gamer. I know. I mean, clearly, a huge percentage of the population spends a lot of their time in games, and so I think that must be for serious gamers kind of a third space, right? I mean, they spend hours and hours a day in games. This is a huge percentage of the population. I feel like we can't discount the fact that people do have that experience, and it must be a comfortable place to be, right?
Yeah.
Or at least an addictive place to be. I don't know if there's much of a difference, but I mean, it's a place people are compelled to be. And I don't know if this answers your question. I'm just kind of riffing on like there are third places. Yes, I mean now home and work, or like our home space is both of the first two. When the weather's warm, I mean, I don't know. The third space has just been like going out and being in the park in New York, or like here in Lisbon, thankfully the weather is still warm. And so I can be out with, I just get a lot of joy from just being out with strangers and watching people and even having random interactions with strangers. And it's satisfying. It feels like, oh, we're humans. We're on this same rock hurling through space, and it feels like there's something satisfying and calming about it, like that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
So,
That's very appropriate for a humanistic show. Yeah, it was true in the early days of well, especially during COVID when I thought I wasn't sure, but I thought I had COVID because I
right.
had all I could do was get
Yeah.
a virtual medical appointment, and the diagnosis was, well, you have symptoms consistent with coronavirus. So like that was it. That was all I could do. It was at a time in New York where the tests weren't available, so
Right.
you just had to isolate yourself. So I was in
Yeah.
isolation for a good long time, and I just desperately wanted people. So I had found this video on YouTube that a photographer had gone around and set up a camera on a tripod and just took ambient footage of just people, like people watching in New York City. And I was like,
Right.
show me the people. I need to see the people. So I
Right.
just watched
Yeah.
this video of people to simulate people watching.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that story. I mean, we can do that. It actually reminds me because I was thinking a little bit, can't help thinking about the Matrix when we think about like a fully immersive, realistic, convincing space. But there's this scene I remember in the first Matrix where I think Morpheus puts Neo in this street scene where, you're just surrounded by people walking by on a city street, like it's New York City. And I don't know. We're talking about simulations. We're talking about
Yeah.
being with people. We're talking about like kind of the joy and the satisfaction and the
Yeah.
grounding experience of being with people. So perhaps eventually we'll have that. Like we'll have, anytime you want, you could just be convincingly in a simulation of being on a city street, and is
I
it's
think it
hard
would
to
work.
believe, even for those of us, even for me, who's like I've had amazing experiences,
Yeah.
at the bleeding edge the last 5 years, especially of being present in a simulation in 3 dimensions with other people that are represented as avatars, but we feel like we're in the same space. It's not like video conferencing at all, right? You really feel
Right.
embodied, even though you're just simulated by a non-photorealistic avatar. But even for me, having these experiences, it's still hard to imagine that Matrix experience in my lifetime. There's so many things that haven't even begun to be solved for. But
Yeah.
um,
So Lucas Glenn commented and said simulated coffee shops. And yeah, I think that's the idea. I think
okay,
that could be I think that'd be really cool.
yes, right.
I'm all
So
for it.
we haven't started trying to solve for yet. I'm not trying to. I'm sure people are trying to solve for it. Is like simulated coffee, right? Like, can you give Kate O'Neill the experience of drinking coffee? You know, but she's not actually drinking coffee, right?
Oh, she will be
Maybe
drinking coffee.
but maybe you don't need to be, because then you could just be anywhere. I guess you can drink coffee anywhere, real coffee.
You pretty much can, except
Maybe,
I don't
yeah,
know. It's an interesting, I guess, an interesting quandary because to me, that is what you're right. Like when we think about immersive experience, when we think about AR, for example, most of what I think we talk about, and it's part of what makes it so exciting, is that sort of digital layering of context. And
It's
I think,
visual.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's tremendously exciting still, yet to be realized fully. But there is
Hmm.
this other thing, and I think, my silly story about watching a video of people on YouTube versus another thing I do from time to time is actually, and I know I'm not alone, there must be people, comment if this is you, if you do this. I put on ambient playlists on Spotify that are of sounds of like coffee shops. And so if I want to write, if
Mm.
I need to write like a chapter of something or whatever, and I put on my headphones and have this kind of like low sound of just
Hmm.
chatter in the background. And
It's
it's
comfort.
so
Yeah.
helpful. It's so helpful. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I believe it that what we're talking about, that you could create, the immersive experience of being around other people that would be, it may not be convincing per se, but might be
Right.
sufficient, you know.
Right. And it's interesting to tie this a little bit back into retail. I mean, one of the things that's been happening in retail for years, right, is experiential retail, right, as a phrase. So there's experiential marketing, but experiential retail is, apparel, or like designer clothing shops have had coffee bars, or like
Mhm.
they've had some other thing that makes them a destination and a place to go and hang out, right, while you're doing your shopping, kind of trying to make it be a third space, right? I mean, a space that you feel
Right.
comfortable being in. Um, the question is, yeah, how can this be done digitally, right? Is there something that can be offered? And again, like this, I'm really intrigued by, these couple startups that I'm connected with that are working with the idea that simulating something like a showroom that you can navigate around and interact with, kind of virtual, but I mean actually human backstore associates. Like, is this going to do some, scratch some of that itch, maybe,
Mhm.
sort of fulfill some of that desire. Like not anywhere near all of it, but it's something that we can do now, that is beyond Zoom, beyond video chat, beyond everything else we have. And it's falls well short of physical presence, but we know the physical presence right now just can't be done in a satisfactory, safe way, just really indoors, right? I think
Yeah.
it kind of can't.
Yeah,
So
it is interesting to think about something for retail that feels like it's parallel to the hybrid model for events. Like I'm seeing with conferences, a lot of them going to this hybrid model of they're going to still do a in-person physical thing. It's, maybe there'll be a fractional audience, kind of like what Saturday Night
right,
Live is doing too, I suppose. Having a
right,
fractional audience that's very socially distanced and masked and everything. And then there's the MC and there's the speakers, and they're there in person mostly, or maybe they're actually virtual in some
right.
cases. But then they're obviously broadcasting that out to a larger audience. And so that feels like there's probably a retail parallel opportunity there too, wouldn't you think, for what you're describing as those experiences that are sort of the premium or the in-person version that's combined with this digital uh, integrative experience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm tempted to say low tech. I mean, but it's high tech, but it's commonly available tech. Using Zoom or FaceTime or Skype, right, is a simple and the only technology needed to do what a lot of stores have done during COVID, which is, where their customers expect this kind of sort of high touch store associate interaction when they come to the stores. They just create a one-on-one video call,
Mhm.
and the store associates in the store or in some beautifully appointed space that has the inventory, and so the shopper just has this one-on-one interaction over video chat or video call and kind of does that associate assisted shopping, right? And so you have that human connection. Again, it's what we're doing now. It's nowhere near as great as sitting across the table and having coffee, but it's a lot better than, a two-dimensional e-commerce style shopping experience, right?
Yeah.
And a lot better than not having any of these, right?
Yeah.
Not being able to go to the store at all. So, I mean, that kind of thing is something that it's interesting that I don't think that's happening or being offered by a lot of retailers. I think it could be.
Well, it'd have to
It's
be a
obviously, it doesn't
big enough
scale as
margin,
well, and
right? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. It's more of a high end sort of boutique kind of thing. But the point is, it's possible, right? And so it's just a question of, is there the financial or business motivation, right, to do it?
Yeah, so those are all such interesting provocations, and I want to bring us back to like a more. Oh, by the way, I also want to include Nathan Bowser said shared experiences are going to be big. Yeah, I think you're right, right? Like I think shared, like immersive kind of experiences. That seems like I think we're saying like the gaming environments are full of them, but
Huge, huge, huge.
there are few I think outside of the gaming context
Hmm.
that are that are nearly as immersive or shared.
One that's super interesting that not everybody, maybe not everyone has heard of yet is so if you use Snapchat or if you follow what they do, I mean, they are really on the leading edge of augmented reality for your mobile device, and obviously have much smaller user base than leading social networks, but they're doing super interesting things. They were kind of first with face filters, first with this feature they called landmarkers a few years ago, where you could point your Snapchat camera at the Flatiron building in Manhattan or certain other kinds of landmarks, and then it would recognize the building, and then you could augment it, like you augment your face, with a face filter. Um, they rolled out last week, I think, on Carnaby Street, I think it is in London, this ability to do shared sort of like paint splatter under your control within Snapchat of the buildings in this pedestrian mall. So not only can you virtually paint these buildings, but you can see what other people who are there are painting on these buildings as well. So it's like a shared augmented experience or layer that's collaboratively created with all the people who are there in that physical space. And each person could see it from their angle as they look at, the buildings through their Snapchat app on their device, right? So it's a kind of it's the conversion or the convergence, I guess, of shared experiences and augmented reality, right? So I don't know if this is what Nathan was talking about, but I mean, it's one way to share. I mean, people are physically together in this physical space and they're sharing in this virtual experience as well. So it's really interesting. It's kind of
Yeah,
layering that
it's like a less
digital
gross
on top,
version of a gum wall.
or a food fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this. Exactly. Yes.
Nathan also says Lowe's and Best Buy are working in this space, and I assume he means that kind of integrated uh, third space sort of uh, type of thing. Nathan, commented if you want to clarify, which space specifically, because we covered a lot of different ground, but maybe you know specifically what he's referring to.
With Best Buy and Lowe's, I mean, I think I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to,
It's
but I
okay.
mean, what it reminds me of is just one of the points I think that we make in another article about what's in store for the store on near future of retail, which is that given all of this, right? This is true a year ago when we wrote this article, and even more so in COVID. Like stores have to really think, and I think retailers and really anybody who's running a business has to really think like what absolutely requires physical presence
Hmm.
in order to sort of fulfill on the value of whatever it is we're offering, right? And what can possibly be rethought, reconfigured, re-engineered to be delivered at a distance, right? And this is how restaurants are surviving via delivery, those that are, and it's not that this is a great solution, but I mean, some of them are surviving. This is how retailers that had invested in direct to consumer are surviving, during COVID. Some of them are even thriving because they're totally optimized for just getting their product directly via shipping, to their customers, and they just don't rely on having a physical space that customers can go to.
Hmm.
Um, but so that trend, I think, is really, yeah, important and powerful. Just as a framing, right? Like, what can be done if we're thinking about as we start to close, right? Like, what are the things that retailers or other business leaders can use to sort of frame or unpack or like discover changes they could make to actually solve for the current moment and what's emerging? You know, look carefully and critically at what could possibly be done to change aspects of your business and how it works so that it doesn't rely on physical proximity, either of like your employees with each other, your employees or your business with the customers, et cetera, right?
Yeah. Nathan, by the way, clarifies he meant the retail consultation through interactive video tools. So
Oh, right.
interesting to
Yes.
see
Yes.
that playing out for those retailers he mentioned. Hey, I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you some sort of broad, big picture questions as we close out, and I wondered, what technologies you see on the horizon that seem like a boost to humanity in general for you.
Yeah. A boost to humanity. This has been said countless times, but I think technologies in themselves I don't know that they're boosts to humanity, honestly. I mean, I can tell you the ones I'm most excited about. I think, frankly, you know, of the last few months, I'm most excited about so many of us waking up, awakening to the importance of including
Mhm.
everybody in the conversations around the kind of future we're creating for humanity and for the kind of alignment of humanity with technology, which I know is at the center of the work that you do, Kate. And I don't know, I feel like we're being pushed and we're pushing each other to kind of bring everybody to the table, which I think is really, really important, are being fed, right? They're being fed data that is, say, overwhelmingly of white faces, and so they don't recognize dark skinned faces. This is, again, it's not necessarily a problem of the technology. It's the problem of the humans that are sort of feeding it incorrectly, in a way that doesn't produce a great outcome. But I will give you a more straightforward answer to your question. And this is to reiterate, I guess. I mean, I'm really excited about technology that can actually solve for distance, like help us feel more present with each other across distance. And it's amazing. Like, and the two sides of this coin. It's amazing that we can do what we're doing now, where we can feel somewhat present, with each other through video calls. Imagine if we didn't have this technology and we had to go through the past year, or 7 months of COVID, without being able to see each other in real time. I mean, I think it would have been much more sad, much more lonely, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I think we can do a lot better than this, right? Which is, and there's a lot of emerging holographic co-presence and augmented reality and being in other physical spaces, simulated spaces, on your mobile device. One particular thing that I'm sure anybody paying attention to technology this week heard is Apple's announcement that this LiDAR technology is now part of their iPhone Pro line,
Mm.
which for the uninitiated, LiDAR is a technology like radar, but it uses light. It makes it so that a device with that capability can create a much higher resolution, regardless of lighting conditions, of the physical environment that it's in when the LiDAR camera is pointed at the space. So what it means is that I mean, and Apple talks about it does have a lot of benefits for photography, but it also has benefits for augmented reality and making AR much, much easier to use, less laggy, more precise, more believable. And so, to the extent that AR helps with solving for distance, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, yeah, that does seem like it was, I think for many people it was a solution in want of a problem when it was introduced, but I think if you look at it from the lens of, what it's going to do for augmented reality potentially, it does seem like it could be a thrilling advance.
I think 6 months from now, certainly 12 months from now, we'll see like, what the developer community can make it do.
Yeah,
I'm excited about it. I've got people who I know who are working on it already. So
cool.
yeah,
All right.
watch this space.
I really want to spend another like half hour in conversation, at least
I
another
know.
hour maybe. And this is usually at the point in our coffee conversations where I go like, "Do you have a hard stop right now?"
I know.
but
What?
uh, but I guess for
Exactly.
our listeners, we should probably call it. And I want to make sure that people know how they can find and follow you and your work online.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, Kate, for making the time. And thanks to everybody who tuned in and is watching this later. Readingfutures.com is a great place to learn about near future framework and get in touch with me. You can use the contact form there. You can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Um, and definitely check out nearfutureofretail.com, which, as Kate said, is a Medium publication. It's kind of a multi-user blog, but Medium does a good job of making it feel like a bit of a magazine, So those are really the three areas that I would suggest. Follow me on LinkedIn. As you mentioned, that's kind of my primary outlet
Yeah.
for near daily kind of perspectives on things.
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, I know anybody who's interested in this topic, you really should be following Neil. His thoughts are second to none. So thank you, Neil, for joining us all the way from Lisbon and for
Thank
making the
you.
time. It was wonderful to see your face and talk with you. I'm sure we'll be catching up again soon. Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
awesome. Thanks again, Kate.
Bye bye.